Exercise, have the patient sitting in a chair with good posture. Have the forearm of the affected limb fully supported by the forearm of the unaffected limb. Have the patient actively forward flexed with the arm still supported. Repeat this as many times as necessary. To work passive range of motion, have the bottom arm drive the motion of forward flexion. While the patient is performing this exercise, make sure they're not compensating in any way, such as involving the upper trap for extra range of motion or arching their lower back to get more range of motion as well. For this exercise, use whatever logical item you have available to you. I had a broom, but a PVC pipe also works, or an item that is similar to one of these two. The hand that is on top is the hand of the affected shoulder, and the hand that is on the bottom belongs to the non-affected shoulder. Just like the previous exercise, the bottom hand drives the motion of forward flexion to help reach end ranges. This exercise should be performed as a progression for passive range of motion. This exercise can also be used for shoulder abduction as well. The same principles apply. The bottom hand drives the motion, allowing the patient to work in a pain-free range of motion. You should stop driving the arm once you have reached a pain-induced range of motion. However, this should only be used when you are working on abduction range of motion, which is normally after progressing forward flexion and extension. This exercise is used for active range of motion. Have your patient stand about an arm's length away so that their fingertips just touch the wall. The purpose of this is to have them push the end ranges of active range of motion. What you want to do is have the patient walk their hand up the wall in a controlled manner, making sure they aren't compensating as they reach their end range. Compensation can take form of upper trap involvement of the same side or leaning towards the opposite side to try to increase their range of motion and get their hand up the wall further. Then have the patient in a controlled manner walk their hand back down and restart the process. This same exercise can be used for abduction. Have the patient stand to the side of the wall and have them walk their hands up the side of the wall and back down in a controlled manner. You are looking for the same forms of compensation here. No upper trap involvement to get increased range of motion, and making sure that they don't create an arch in their back to try to get end ranges as well. Make sure when working on abduction range of motion that they have already regained most of their flexion and extension range of motion. An easy way to have the patients do this and to mark their progress is to put pieces of tape or stickers on the wall as a visual marker, and then each week or each time they try, have them try to reach a new tape level or a new sticker. Have the patient stand a comfortable distance away from the wall. In the beginning, the patient will most likely have their feet closer to the wall, and as they increase their strength, be able to move their feet farther away from the wall. Have the patient perform a push-up on the wall and at the end round their back. The rounding of their back, or the plus part in wall push-up plus, helps improve scapular rhythm, which is necessary after anterior shoulder dislocation. Make sure the patient's hands are underneath their shoulders and their core and glutes are engaged. The proper recruitment of these two muscles are necessary as we progress from the wall push-up to the floor. A kneeling push-up is the next progression of a wall push-up. However, an incline push-up can be done here as well. This exercise becomes more difficult due to how the body's weight is dispersed and how gravity is acting upon the body. I put a yoga mat underneath my knees for comfort. The same concepts still apply to this exercise. Make sure the hands are underneath the patient's shoulders but can be placed at a reasonable distance apart. Also make sure their back is nice and flat to ensure that the core as well as the glutes are being properly engaged. The final progression of this exercise is a regular push-up with the plus. This is harder than the kneeling push-up because you are taking away a point of contact, putting more stress on the involved muscles. As this patient performs this exercise, make sure their back remains flat, the core and glutes are engaged, and they pause after the plus to reset the scapulas before moving into the next push-up. In this exercise, have the patient flex their arm as much as they can and then perform a pressing motion. The purpose of this exercise is to work on forward flexion and start incorporating more movement within a comfortable range of motion. Have both arms remain at the same level to stimulate an actual press with a bar. An object can be added, like a broom or PVC pipe, to help them with this motion. While they are pressing, make sure the patient's back is flat against the floor and that they're pressing into the ground through their feet to create full body tension while doing this motion. I incorporate a punch out at the end to involve the serratus anterior, which is a muscle involved with scapular stabilization. A progression of this exercise is to now do a single arm chest press with weight. Performing this movement with one arm causes the muscles to work harder and stabilize the limb throughout the movement. If you don't have any weights, a gallon of water is the perfect substitute because you can add or take away water in order to get a weight that works for you. As the clinician, you are still focusing on the patient's back being flat against the floor. However, in this exercise, have the non-working arm in 90 degrees of abduction and tell the patient to make a fist. Tell them to squeeze it, and while pressing their feet into the floor, simultaneously to create full body tension as they do a single arm chest press. A final potential progression of this exercise is to have them do the same thing but instead incorporate a glute bridge. This makes it harder because it recruits more muscle involvement throughout the exercise. In the glute bridge, make sure the patient is in full hip extension but isn't overextended. The chest press movement should not be compromised because of the incorporation of a glute bridge. The next group of exercises are isometric exercises for flexion, extension, and external rotation. For flexion extension, have them close to the wall with their knees slightly bent in an athletic stance. Have them push against the wall for the desired motion for 5 seconds and then relax. Do this as many times as you see necessary. I change the positioning of my hand to target different muscles, however, a neutral position will most likely be the most comfortable. For external rotation, have the affected shoulder completely against the wall and have them push the back of their hand into the wall for 5 seconds and then relax. Once again, do this as many times as you see necessary. A progression of shoulder flexion is shoulder front raises. I have the patient using a band to create some tension. Before they start the motion, make sure they are in an athletic stance and their shoulder blades are depressed and retracted. You can have them pull the band apart slightly before raising it and then have them raise it to shoulder height. And if you like, have them pause at the top for 3 seconds and then come back down in a controlled manner. A way to challenge this exercise is to make it single arm and/or add weight. The position makes it easier for the patient to compensate, so make sure they're keeping their scapulars depressed and retracted while going through the motion. Upper trap involvement or arching the back are common compensations. Make sure the patient isn't swinging their arm to create momentum while doing this. The action should be coming from the shoulder with control. I had my non-working arm squeezing a fist to create full body. Tricep extensions are a progression from the isometric movement we performed earlier. Have the patient bent forward with their scapula depressed and retracted. If the patient keeps this position, the upper trap should never be involved, which is a sign of compensation. Have the patient send their hand backwards to fully extend the elbow. To work the muscle harder, have them pause at full extension and then come back down. A way to make this even more difficult is to use a free weight of some sort instead of a band. A progression from the isometric external rotation exercise performed earlier is side-lying external rotation, which eliminates gravity but allows the muscle to start to lengthen and contract. The patient should lay on their unaffected side so that the injured shoulder is free to move through external rotation. Have the patient lay in a stacked position with their shoulders and hips in a straight line and the knees bent enough to allow the ankles to follow that same line. The patient moves through external rotation with their elbow glued to their side. If using weight is too painful at first, have them do it without it. For internal rotation, which hasn't been discussed yet, have the patient lay on their affected shoulder. This may be uncomfortable, so try to put them in a position as comfortable as possible. The shoulder can be slightly forward so that not all the weight is directly on that shoulder. Have them move through internal rotation. Once again, if using weight is too difficult at first, have them do it without it. Having the patient stand while performing internal and external rotation has now added gravity to the exercise, progressing it. The patient should place an object at their side and use their elbow to hold it in place. The patient should stand in an athletic stance and have their scapulas depressed and retracted. Then the patient is free to move through internal and external rotation. When doing external rotation, however, the object might have to be placed higher due to the natural flaring of the elbow while moving out of internal rotation. I find it better to use the band while performing internal rotation. The same concepts still apply here. As the patient gets better with performing the exercises, the external cue of the object can be removed and more weight can be added. Although these are labeled as progressions throughout the video, if the patient is having difficulty performing the exercise, they can always be regressed back to the previous exercise.